We are continuing the series, Parenting in the 21st Century. I'm Ryan. We are so glad that you are here. How many empty nesters do we have in the room? Let me see your hands. Empty nesters. Look at these people. They say, we've made it. We've done it. Round of applause for the empty nesters. You made it. How many boomerang parents are in the room? You thought your kids were gone, but then they came back. Let me see your hands. Okay. There's some of those. How about grandparents? Any grandparents in the room? Right? Your job is just to spoil them, isn't it? And we know you've been up since 4 a.m., so we're glad you're awake and you're here with us this morning. That's great. How about new parents, like 2 years or less? You're a brand new parent. Suckers. Suckers, yeah. And we know that you look like zombies, but we're glad you're here too. And last but not least, what about those with teenagers? Any teenagers in the house? Anybody with teenagers, our prayers are never ending for you, all right? We are in the trenches with you. We have 4 kids, ages 7 to 16, and so we are in it with you. This whole thing about building relationships is kind of what we're going with today. But here's what I know and what I wish is that, you know, when our kids were born, wouldn't it have been nice had the nurse handed you the baby and then the other nurse said, here's the manual. Wouldn't that have been nice, right? To get a parenting manual, trying to figure out how all of this works. And I don't know, you know, nobody ever really sat down with us and warned us to think, what were we thinking in having kids? I remember when our oldest boys, who are now 16 and 17, they were 2 and 3, and we were staying at a hotel, and I had already left the room for the morning, and my wife was still getting ready, and so she put our 2 boys onto the bed, turned on cartoons, and said, you know, boys, you sit here, I'm gonna go get ready. And so she's in the bathroom getting ready. Well, while they're sitting there, I don't know which one of them had the idea, but they had the idea to take the remote control, and they thought to themselves, what would this be like if it was in the microwave? And so they went over and opened up the microwave door and put that in, and somehow they got it started. I don't know how they got it started, but they got it started, and all of a sudden they were screaming, and my wife came out to the screaming in the room, and there were sparks and flames shooting around inside the microwave, and my wife quickly opened the door, and later she told me this. I said, what did you do? She said, we just checked out. I just left. I didn't know what to do. Too bad we did not get a manual that taught us how to navigate all of these situations. And I think we'd all agree that parenting is a hard gig, right? There is no manual that comes with it. But the good news is that we can look to others who have gone before us, and we can look to the Bible that has incredible answers for us and guidelines on how we should raise our kids. This verse, Psalm 127, 3-5, that says this: kids are a heritage from the Lord, children a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are sons born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. And sometimes it's good to be reminded of that, isn't it? Good to be reminded that our kids are a reward and that they're a heritage. But when we think about that, I think the question we all tend to ask ourselves is, how am I doing in stewarding this reward? How am I doing in stewarding this heritage that God has given me? And am I doing enough of the right things to make a difference in my kid's life? Am I doing enough of the right things? Because in all of my years, and we were youth pastors for 11 years, we've been doing this for 11 years, in all of my years in talking to people who have run into major problems in their life, I never heard things like this. My life began to unravel when I didn't make the 8th grade tennis team. Or my life began to unravel when I couldn't go on the Canada trip with the rest of my classmates. I didn't hear people say, my life began to unravel when I only got to play 3 sports a year, or when I didn't get the math tutor that I needed, or I had to miss my dance recital that one day. I have never heard people begin, my life began to unravel with, and then say those things. More times than not, what I have heard people say is, my life began to unravel when my relationship with my parents went sideways, or when I didn't have the relationship with mom and dad that I needed or I hoped for. And so as parents, as we're going into this series, right, we have to ask ourselves this question: what are we doing to build the relational health with our kids? What are we doing with that? And maybe you would even say that growing up, that was the way it was for you and your parents. And as we said last week in our series, as we kicked this thing off, we said that it was your parents' behavior, not their advice, that determined their influence in your life. It was the behavior, not their advice, that determined whether or not you wanted to be with them or be like them. And so last week, if you missed that, go to riverwaychurch.com. I encourage you to catch up with us. But I think in our culture, this is something that we're all going to battle with, and it comes into play when we're trying to build relationships with our kids, and it's the first fill-in on your notes. It's this, that something that all parents will battle with is the trend in our culture to make our kids experience rich and relationship poor. The trend to make our kids be experience rich and relationship poor. And I get it, maybe we want our kids to have something that we didn't have, right? To experience something that we didn't get to experience. To give them as many opportunities as possible while unintentionally we make our kids experience rich and relationship poor. And we all know this is true, that in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, it's the ability to develop mature and healthy relationships that makes life worth living. It's not just drawing from great experiences. It's not just drawing from great opportunities. Not that there's anything wrong with those experiences, but as a culture, we become so preoccupied with giving our kids all of the experiences that we don't realize that we're missing the relational basis that is going to cause them to be healthy into their later years in life. We're so preoccupied by being the chauffeur and getting them to all of their things on time that we can't even remember the last time that we had dinner around the table together or had a meaningful conversation between us. We sometimes make the mistake of measuring our success as parents as to how busy we are and how many experiences our kids are having or how well our kids are maintaining their GPA. But we rarely monitor them in terms of quality relationships. And I can remember when my kids were really little and I would come through the door and they were toddlers, that I could barely get my coat off or my shoes off and they're begging to play tiger or horse or wrestling or play with the kitchen or do something. And I would just be like, oh, can I play from the couch? Like, I'm tired, but those kids, they're just on you. They want to be around you. They want to play those things and do all of those things. And when they ask for those things, what are they really communicating? They're saying, can we have some relational time together? Can we build our relationship together? Even though they don't even know that they're asking that, that's what they're asking for, is to build relationship with us. And if I were to ask you, do you believe that building a relationship with your child is important? Every one of us would say yes. If I were to ask you why it's important, I think some of us would stumble just a little bit. So let me give you the why. Your next fill-in. That nothing determines the trajectory of our kids' lives more than their relationship with us as parents. There is not another relationship on earth that is more important. Nothing determines the trajectory of our kids' lives more than their relationship with us as parents. And relationships with aunts and uncles and grandparents and friends and teachers and coaches, all of that is wonderful, but nothing determines their trajectory more than their relationship with mom and dad. That relationship is so important, especially through those young years, that we have limited time to make influence, limited time to teach values, limited time. And what I've seen some parents do, they've been so preoccupied with their career path that they've missed out on the most influential years. They've been so preoccupied with chauffeuring kids around to this and that they haven't stopped to consider what that might be taking away from relationship. So the question is, what can I do to build relationships that last? Right? Because the end goal is not to raise them until they're 18 and say, see ya. The goal is to maintain a friendship their entire life, to remain in a seat of influence their entire life. So how do we do that? And so this talk really is for everybody. It doesn't matter if you have little kids. It doesn't matter if you hope to have kids. It doesn't matter if your kids are grown. It doesn't matter if you're a grandparent. It's never too late to invest in the relationships we have with our kids. So what do we do to build a relationship that lasts? Well, one key, your next fill-in, to building a purposeful relationship with your kid is to get into their world. One key to building a personal relationship and a purposeful relationship is to get into their world. And we know that this looks different at every stage of your kid's life. But think about it right now. What are you doing to get into your kid's world? And maybe you'd ask, well, how do I do that? How do I get into their world? I'll never forget when I had a dad from our youth ministry days come to me. He had 2 boys that were in our youth group that went through our youth program. And he came to me and said, Ryan, I really need your help. He says, I feel like I'm losing relationship with my second son. He's 15 years old. I just feel like we're not connecting. I don't know what to do. What should I do? And I said, well, tell me a little bit more about that. He said, with my older son, it's easy because he loves sports and he loves football, and I love sports and I love football. And so we automatically connect in that way. But he said, my second son, he's into music and guitars and video games, and I'm not into any of those things. And like, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, here's what I would tell you. That it's not about your son getting into your world. It's about you getting into his. And so I'm going to venture a guess that you're about to become really interested in video games, music, and guitars, aren't you? 5 years later, that dad called me. I had completely forgotten about that interaction, totally forgot about our conversation. And he just said, Ryan, I want to say thank you. He said, we had that discussion, and he goes, I made up my mind from that point forward that I was going to get in his world. And I did. And he said, the moment I did, our relationship began to change. And now he's 20 years old. And we have an awesome relationship because of that advice I received to get into his world. What are we doing as parents to get into their world? Because what does it mean, your next fill-in? Getting into their world means to become interested in what they're interested in, even if you are not. Why? Because it's not the connection. It's the connection, not the activity that matters. Right? Getting into their world means we're interested in what they're interested in. And over the years, I've had to be interested in a lot of different things. Some that came naturally to me, and like sports and football and those kind of things. There was other things that didn't come naturally to me, like dance and gymnastics and those kind of things, right? I had to get into this world that I knew nothing about, that I had to learn some things about to get into my kids' world. And we all have to do the same. And the reason it's important is because it's the connection. It's not about the activity. It's about the purposeful connection that we build with our children. And this connection is all about time and acceptance, right? I remember with Paxton, our youngest, he's 7 years old, first grade. At Christmas time, we gave him a basketball hoop that goes on his door. And for the last 2 months, it sat unopened in his room. And every time we'd go into his room, usually always right before bed, he'd be like, Dad, I want to set this up. And I was like, no, it's bedtime, and we're busy, and I'm tired, and we just didn't, and we didn't. And he would ask me other times, I'd say, well, maybe we can get to it later because I'm busy with this or that. And finally, I started, he asked me about a week and a half ago, and I felt really guilty over it because I thought, here, this basketball hoop has been sitting there. He's asked me no less than 5 times to set it up. And I keep saying, I'm just too busy, or we'll get to it later. And so I was like, all right, Ryan, like no more excuses. Right now, you just got to get this thing done. And so we did. We built it together, and then we put it up. And it has been so much fun. And almost every day is like, can we go to my game for a basketball game? And we go and have a basketball game together. And he's just loving it and eating it up right now, which only makes me feel more guilty, right? I mean, so that's good. So I'm failing on some level. But, I think it's so important, because our kids, they know we're busy because we tell them a lot, don't we? Our kids know how busy we are. But do they know that they are more important than our other stuff we have going on? Do they know they're more important than our work? Do they know that we're more important than our schedule? More important than me trying to finish this book or being on a phone or watching this show, whatever it might be? Do they know that we're more important? And the reality is, I know that you have a lot on your plate because we all do. But my advice to you is to say yes as often as possible whenever they want to do something with you. Say yes as often as possible because there will come a day that they don't ask near as much to do things with you. So I encourage you to say yes, to soak it up as long as you can. And giving them your time and your acceptance communicates that you care about them more than anything else. Because we can't just tell them that we care. We have to show them that we care. And in the book of Matthew, there was children that were all around Jesus trying to have access to him. And the disciples kept pushing the children away. Saying, no, you don't understand how busy he is. You don't understand that he has really important things to do. And it's interesting that in Matthew 19:14, we actually hear Jesus' rebuke to his disciples over this. He said this, let the little children come unto me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. How amazing that even Jesus, we think our plate is full. He was only here to save humanity. But he said, no. whatever we got going on, we're shutting it down. Let the kids come. Because this is the next generation. Right? Jesus made time, and we have to make that time too. We have to prioritize that time. Why is it so important that we prioritize time and build that relationship? Because your next fill-in, relationship buys the right to influence your child's life. Relationship buys the right to influence your child's life. Have you ever heard of the saying, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care? Have you ever heard that before? Right, and as adults, we know that that's true. Right, we want to feel cared for, and the more we feel cared for, the more we're willing to listen to people. But for kids, it's intrinsic in them. Especially the older they get, as they get into their teenage years, they really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And sometimes as parents, we just want our kids to know how much we know. Right? It's why we say things like, because I said so, and because I'm the boss, and because I'm the mom, and I'm the dad, and we forget that it's not our control that ultimately matters most, it's our influence. Right? That our goal would be always to be in a seat of influence no matter what age our kids are, that we can always speak into their life, that we can always speak into their circumstances. That is the end goal. And so if that's the goal, what would it look like to have deep relationship with your kids now and long after they're gone from your house? What would that look like? What kind of influence do you want to have with your kids? Because I would like you to consider this morning that at certain ages, it's always better to lose control rather than influence. It's always better to end up, as they get older, losing control to hold on to influence. It's so, so, so important. And I want to show you a little graph that might help you with this. At the bottom, we've got authority and friendship, right? We've got rules, we've got control, and we've got relationship, we have influence at the bottom. And both of these are both important in our kids' life. But there's multiple stages for our kids as they grow up. And the first one is the nurse stage, 0 to 3. And you'll see that both authority and friendship are pretty low, right? And the reason I say nurse is because the reality is we're just trying to keep our kids alive at that point, right? I mean, 0 to 3, can we just keep you from not blowing things up in the microwave, right? I mean, that's the whole plan here. That's the whole idea. We just want to keep them alive. And then we enter the stage of 3 to 12 years old where you can see that actually your authority has to go way up, right? Because this age 3 to 12, this is such an important time to instill values, to instill rules, right? And here's why we have these rules, and here's why we do what we do, right? These things are communicated to them, and again, but you'll notice that friendship slowly begins to build at this stage. A lot of mistakes that parents make is they think, well, I just want to be my kid's best friend. And if I'm just their friend, then they'll like me forever. But the reality is if they don't have the right values in place, if they don't have the right parameters in place, if they don't have the right boundaries in place, which we'll talk about next week, so don't miss that, right? If they don't have those things in place, they won't be able to have those healthy relationships long term. They won't be able to make right life decisions as they get older because those things haven't been instilled in them. So while friendship is slowly building, it is not the primary function of ages 3 to 12. We are still in a high control, high value situation. Then we move into what I call the coach, right? And during this time, as your kids go through their teenage years, there's this natural arc where authority and control should begin to fade out in your kid's life, and friendship begins to cross over. Now, I'm not saying in this graph when they turn 12, 13 years old, suddenly they're holding the keys and running the show. That's what I'm saying. That as they get older, as they get in those years, you're beginning to allow them to make more and more decisions. As they have responsibility, as they make right choices, you're handing more and more to them. Right by the time they're 16, 17, 18 years old, you're letting them make more and more decisions for themselves, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want them to be functional adults, don't we? We don't want to live in our basement forever, right? So we want them to be functional adults. But in that time, we also have to begin to slowly release control. Now, this is hard for most parents because I want to stay in control. I want to make all the decisions for you because if I just make all the decisions for you, I know that we're going to end up with a good result. The reality is the more you're in control, the more your kids are going to push away from that and say, no, I don't want that in my life. I don't want to listen to you. Why? Because the relationship isn't there. I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. The other reality in this situation is that we want our kids to feel the full weight of their bad decisions now while the stakes are small. We want them to be in trouble at school with their principal. We want them to be in trouble with their teachers. We want them to be in trouble with a neighbor. We want them to feel the weight of that, because guess what? If we rescue them from every one of those situations, they will think that people will rescue them the rest of their lives. And the older they get, the more stakes are higher, right? The more it's gonna cost. And we'll talk more about that next week. But then lastly, really, this end goal is friendship with our kids, isn't it? Our end goal is friendship, that at the end of the day, when they leave our house, that they want to come back, that they want to be around us, that they're still calling up on the phone and saying, hey, mom and dad, I have a question for you. I need to know how to handle X, Y, and Z. I don't know what to do. Can I have your advice? Isn't that the end goal? The problem is for parents who refuse to let go of control, what they don't realize is that at the end of the day, your authority still ends up at the bottom. Whether your choice or theirs, your authority no longer has control over them. The real question at this last stage is, where will your friendship be? Where will your relationship be? Where will your influence be with them? You see, as they get older, your next fill-in. Influence always trumps control. Influence always trumps control. We should want to be in the seat of influence no matter what stage of life our kids are in. All right, we want to be in that influence stage. We do that by building relationship all the way through with them. But that means at some point we got to slowly release control and grab hold of relationship, of influence through relationship. Right, when your kids are young, right, that's why you're king and queen, right? You're ruler of the castle when they're young. And in part because you are mom and dad, but also because if you tell your kid to go to their room and they say no, what can you do? I'm gonna pick you up and move you to your room, right? Because I have size and position over you. That's important. Right? I can't remember the last time that my mom picked me up and moved me somewhere. There will come a time that your size and position will matter no longer. The question is, what kind of relationship do you have with them when that comes to be? And if you don't get anything else out of this, I'd pay attention to this right here, your next fill-in. That when it matters most, the quality of your relationship with your children will determine the weight of your influence. When it matters most, the quality of relationship with your children will determine the weight of your influence. And here's the key. If we don't begin to shift towards relational influence in our kids' lives while we still have position and size advantage, we could lose it forever. Right? We build it through purposeful time and acceptance. That relational time. And maybe your kids are in those years where it's 14, 15, 16, 17, you say, I feel like I'm losing control. Or I feel like I don't have influence. I feel like they don't care what I'm saying. Paul actually gives us a window of opportunity to try to understand what might be going on. And in Ephesians 6:4, he encourages parents this way. He says, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. Don't provoke your children to anger. This is so important. Sometimes in our parenting, we can actually provoke our kids to be mad at us. And I would define provoke this way on your notes: taking advantage of your size and position to make your kids mad at you. To take advantage of my size and position as the dad, as the mom, as the authority figure, to make you mad at me. And from our kids' perspective, it feels like they can never win. And when that happens, they feel like the relationship is off balance. And they don't know what to do with that, except begin to distance themselves. It's the exact opposite of what we want, isn't it? And Paul says if you aren't careful, you'll provoke them to anger and you'll begin to chip away at your relationship with them. And in that moment or stage of life, they might do exactly what you want them to do, but when the day comes that size and position no longer matter, you will lose your influence and relationship with them. But instead, Paul says, bring them up. Bring them up. It actually means to nourish. It's this Greek word ektrepho, which actually means to build or invest into. That's what Paul says. He says, don't bring them to a point of anger. Don't provoke them. Instead, build them up. Invest in relationship. Invest in the relationship you have with them. And believe me, I get it. I mean, if you've got a middle schooler or high schooler, you already know that size and position is having less and less importance in their life. And I want to encourage you that now is the time to focus on relationship over everything else. Focus on building relationship over everything else. And I know some of you with teenagers, you're thinking to yourselves, well, I can't do this because it won't work. And I would say, what won't work? Well, I won't get them to do what I want them to do. And I would say that's no longer the point. The point is they're getting 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. The point isn't to remain in control and dictate their life. The point is to remain in a seat of influence and build such a close relationship that honor comes out of them. That they'll realize that all the things you've taught them to do, they want to do because of relationship that we've built with them. See, as your kids get older, your next fill-in, you must focus your shift. Your focus must shift from them always doing what you want them to do to building a relationship that will give you influence the rest of your life. And over the years, I saw plenty of parents that didn't instill the values, that didn't do the hard work in relationship building when they were young until that 12, 13, 14, they didn't do the work. And then when the teenagers become teenagers, and there's this clash of wills, what moms and dads tend to do is plop themselves in the middle of their life and try to strong arm their teenager. And say, you're going to listen to me and don't use that tone with me, and I'm the mom and I'm the dad and this is the roof, you're staying in my roof and blah, 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 blah. And all it does is escalate and push our kids further and further and further away, and we end up with no influence. Right? The point of it is to remain in the seat of influence. And you might say, well, I'm right. But Ryan, I'm right. But Ryan, I'm right. And I would say you might be right. But that's no longer the point. The point is to retain influence. And we do that through relationship. Does that mean they don't need boundaries and discipline and all that? Absolutely. We'll talk more about that next week. But we absolutely have to stay focused on how we're building our relationship. So here's the more important question. What can I do now to shift the relationship towards me? What can I do now? It doesn't matter how old they are. What can I do now to shift the relationship towards me so that I can be the chief influencer the rest of their life? Why do you want to be the chief influencer the rest of their lives? This is so important. Don't miss this. Because emotionally healthy people tend to have emotionally healthy relationships. And people with unhealthy relationships tend to struggle. This is so important. Let me say it this way, your last fill-in. When you invest in relationship with your kids, it's like investing in all of their future relationships and decisions. When you're instilling values, when you're building a relationship and you're doing all these things, that investment is paving the way for every future decision they will ever make. And it's going to impact you because it's going to impact who they marry. It's going to impact your grandkids. It's going to impact the friends that they choose to surround themselves with. It absolutely impacts us. And that's why, from the time they're young, we want to begin to build relationship. And so in the 2 minutes that I have left, let me just leave you with some really practical ways to build a relationship. And again, my job today is just to pour my cup out, and if it helps you, it helps you, and to give you some things, and if it doesn't help you, it doesn't help you. But here's some practical ways to build relationships. First thing is to create memories through traditions. Create memories with your kids that they can look back on. Traditions, things that you do year over year. Maybe it's a state fair, the apple orchard, something special on Christmas or birthday. Maybe it's a camping trip, a vacation. Just something that they can look back and say, year over year, our family did this, my parents did this. Next, carve out one-on-one time. This is important. Birthdays. We've always let our kids skip school on their birthday, and then we take off of work that day, and we go spend a whole day with them. Whatever they want to do. We go to eat where they want to go to eat. We go to Dave & Buster's, whatever it is. We just spend time with them. Maybe it's a surprise breakfast. Maybe it's date night with mom or dad. This is so important to begin, spending that time one-on-one with your kids as they get older. Next, be verbal in your acceptance of love. Be verbal in your acceptance and love. And they got to hear this over and over again. They need to hear you say, I love you. I'm proud of you. I accept you. I'm with you. I'm for you. And if you grew up in an environment where you didn't hear those words, it might be uncomfortable for you. And I know my own dad, he didn't hear his dad say I love you to him until he was 18 years old. I can't tell you how important it is that if you are uncomfortable saying those words in the politest way that I know how, please get past it. Your kids need to hear those words from you over and over again. Next, ask them detailed questions about what's going on in their life and what they're thinking. Take advantage of the car time, right? We have a no phone zone in our car, right? Put your phones away, we're talking, right? Tell me what's going on, right? Build those relationships. When you're out one-on-one for donuts or you're one-on-one out for Chick-fil-A, whatever it is, build those relationships. What's going on at school? What's going on in your friendships, right? Is there any drama going on? Just begin to build those things. Ask detailed questions about what's going on in their life. Next, have a weekly family night, especially if you have a busy schedule. Maybe it's play a game, family devotions, watch a TV show together, just something where you're trying to gather regularly together. Next, have regular family dinner, asking about their favorite part of the day. Again, keep it positive. And the last week in this series, it's called Future at Stake, and we're going to be talking about how our kids' future and what we can do to build them to be long-term successful. And one of the things that research has shown is that it's so important that families gather around the table for a meal. And researchers say 5 times a week is the goal. 5 times a week to have dinner around the table together. And that was a lot easier as our kids were younger. As they're older, it's become a little more difficult. And we have to be really intentional about our time together. And then as we're around the table, what's the best part of your day, right? Sometimes the worst part comes up, but we try to keep it positive. What's going on in your world, right? What happened today? Everybody shares, and we go around. Dinner time together is so important. Then the last couple things, put your phone away. Mom and dad, put phones away. Don't lose out on what's right in front of you. Try your best to keep work at work or wait until they go to bed, right? I had a hard, fast rule that when I got home, my kids did not see me pull my laptop out. I'm there, and it's dad time. I am shifting into dad mode, and I've only got a couple hours until they go to bed. And I'm full on dad mode. And then when they go to bed, if I've got to pull it out and I got to start working on some other stuff and get to work on my laptop, I can do that. But again, I'm trying my best to keep work at work. Next, make your gifts activity-based, especially the older they get. Again, we're building a relationship, which means time together. So as our kids have gotten older, right, it's a concert ticket instead of a toy. You know, it's something that, hey, their interests, we're going all in on them. We're making gifts more activity-based. And then lastly, make their activities or interests a priority in your schedule. So making sure you're attending their stuff. Show up again into their world. And I got to tell you, it's not going to be easy, right? We know it's not easy. And we're not going to do this right all the time. In fact, none of us, hear me when I say this, none of us could be all of these things all the time. There's going to be times we fail. There's going to be times we have to apologize and start over. But it's worth it. There's an age-old saying in real estate investing. They say, when is the best time to invest in real estate? And the answer is 20 years ago. When was the best time to invest in Netflix? 15 years ago. When's the next best time? Now. And so the right answer to say, when do we invest in our kids? It might have been a year ago. And it might have been 5 years ago. And it might have been 10 years ago. But there's nothing that we can do about that. When is the next best time? Right now. Right now. That we become intentional to build relationship and influence with them that would last the rest of their life. Why? Because they are our heritage. They are our reward. Blessed is the man or woman whose quiver is full of them. So can we pray together? Would you mind just closing your eyes all over this room? Even if you're watching online, would you mind closing your eyes with us? And I just want us to take 30 seconds between you and God. And just to ask this question, God, how am I doing when it comes to relationship and influence and control? How am I doing being intentional to build relationship? Let's just ask that question and let God just direct us in this time. So Heavenly Father, we thank you for the reward and the blessing that our children's are to us. And may we be reminded again and again by your Spirit the importance of building relationship no matter what stage of life our kids are at. And much like planting a seed in good soil and watering and giving sunshine, may we be that for our kids, to help them have a fruitful life, and that one day that we'd remain in a seat of influence all their life so we can help shape and mold and guide, and we never lose that place. So I pray even this week that you'd speak to our hearts about some very specific things we can do to grow our relationship with our kids. And would you help us along the way? God, I ask you to fill in the gaps where we've missed the mark, the times that we haven't been what we needed to be. Thank you, God, for your faithfulness that allows us an opportunity in this season right now to do the things that maybe we haven't done. I pray you'd help us and there'd be fruit on the other side of those decisions. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.